There I congratulated my executive officer, Lieutenant Yoshinosuke Kudo, and my crew for their alertness in diving the boat. A supply run to New Guinea usually required 7 days for the round trip. We left Simpson Harbour and swung around to run along the north side of New Britain, travelling submerged after the first day's run. Boats were scheduled to arrive at destination during the third night out. After unloading, a submarine would race away at top speed in the darkness, cross the sea underwater in daylight, and return to Rabaul the same way she had left. I cleared the harbour and was running along the north side of New Britain, worried that the rough seas might carry away some of my on-deck cargo the men on New Guinea so sorely needed, when I received a wireless report from Rabaul. It said the enemy was making landings at Finschhafen, north of Cape Cretin, somewhat to the east of Ley. I-177 will intercept, read the new orders. When I announced this change of plans to my crew, all hands at once shouted, "Eco, let's go." They were sick and tired of the dull transport duty they had been carrying out before I took over command. Here was a chance to fight. We had all 4 forward and both after tubes loaded with torpedoes, and the men were eager for battle. We stole cautiously through Dampier Strait underwater and arrived off Finschhafen on the evening of September 13th. Not one destroyer or any other enemy vessel was to be seen. I made a wide scouting sweep of the area, then headed for Ley. We arrived at the rendezvous point about 90 minutes after sunset on September 14th. The last of our forces were clearing out, and Ley was about to fall to the enemy. I could see fire at several places along the shore. Someone shouted across the water to me, "It is too dangerous to discharge your cargo right now. Enemy artillery can reach you." I put I-177 about and sailed away for a while. Enemy shells fell in our wake not long afterward, prompting me to dive the boat. About 20 minutes later we surfaced, returned to the rendezvous, and began unloading. My crew quickly turned to, moving out the interior cargo via 3 hatches. We were almost finished with the job when my sound watch reported propeller noises some 3 miles distant. I quickly cleared the main deck and dived I-177 again, going all the way to our maximum safe depth of 330 feet. The sound watch reported 4 destroyers coming at use. I ordered the boat rigged for depth charge attack, but nothing happened. No depth charges were dropped upon us, and that somewhat disrupted my plans. I felt we'd been trapped and intended to come to periscope depth, there to fight it out, rather than simply taking blow after blow until my ship was destroyed. As time went by, I realized that although he might have picked us up on his radar earlier, the enemy did not now have us on his sonar. Temperature of the water was 80 degrees on the surface, which probably saved my boat, crew, and me. In the tropics, water can develop into strata at various levels. This caused sound impulses to bend, giving false indications or none at all on the sonar equipment used in World War II. After a while, I took I-177 up to periscope depth. The destroyers had departed, so I moved to the surface and built up speed for the run out of that area. Mine was the last supply trip that Japanese submarines made into Ley, and I was back at Rabaul on September 17th, completing safely my first round trip to New Guinea. Added to runs made by submarines between March and September 1943, the total cargo carried was more than 4,000 tons of food, ammunition, medicine, and other supplies. On the same day I took command of I-177. A special order went out from Vice Adm. Komatsu to Kurdata Tsuso Inaba, who had I-36. Equipped with the scout aircraft, nicknamed Geta because its pontoons resembled Japanese wooden clogs, I-36 was then at Yokosuka, undergoing refit. ADM Koga had deduced from intelligence reports that the Americans were gathering in great strength at Pearl Harbor, so he made a special request of the 6th Fleet commander. Admiral Komatsu's message to Inaba said, "You will make an air reconnaissance of Pearl Harbor base and report on enemy strength there." On the following day, I-8 arrived at Brest, France, the second Japanese submarine sent to Europe. She had left Penang, Sumatra, in July, and was destined to be the only one of 5 Japanese submarines sent to Europe that made the round trip safely. The other 4 were lost en route. The captain of I-8 was Sea Doctor Shinji Uchino, like myself a Kagoshima man. He had graduated from Etajima 10 years before I did, and, so far as I am concerned, he was the master submariner of Japan. He was skipper of RO-27, the first submarine I went aboard. He gave me my first acquaintance with submarines at that time. In 1940, when I was an officer student at submarine school, and again when I took the commanding officer's course in 1942, Uchino instructed me in submarine attack methods. In 1944, when I took command of I-47 and was assigned to Subron 11 while undergoing shakedown training, Uchino was its chief staff officer. Again, he taught me combat tactics. In 1945, when I took over the attack section of the submarine school at Kure, he was senior instructor there. Throughout my submarine career, I always seemed, somehow, to be under Uchino's wing. By nature, I was a plodding man and absorbed things somewhat slowly. I was often criticized by others as too slow to be a good submarine man, but Uchino always stood by me. He was not talkative, more like a scholar than a military man, but he was sympathetic and patient with others as well as me. Because of this kind man, who developed the method of torpedo fire control adopted by the Imperial Navy, I became a passable submarine captain. To this great man I owe the fact that I was one of the few Japanese submarine captains to survive the war. RO-500, the first of 2 German submarine gifts to be taken into the Japanese Navy, was officially received on September 16th. Uchino, in I-8, had taken to France the crew for manning the second, RO-501. I had hardly gotten I-177 back from its run to Leh when I was ordered out again, this time to Finschhafen, an emergency landing point for submarine-borne supplies. I-774 and I-776 had just made trips there successfully. Now it was our turn. The entrance to the bay was about 200 yards wide and its area about 2 square miles. If there was no interference from enemy surface patrols, a submarine could move in easily, unload and turn around for the run-out. It was almost ideal for our purposes. I headed there on September 21st, 1943. On the way out of Simpson Harbour, we met I-776, now commanded by Leutnant Kisaburo Yamaguchi. He hailed us and sent me a signal. PT boats are constantly patrolling near Finschhafen Bay, it read. It would be best if you tried to make your run right into the bay while still submerged, rather than entering on the surface. Don't forget that a red light on the point means danger, and a green light means that all is well. Good luck. On the second night out from Rabaul, I received a wireless that enemy troops had landed just north of Finschhafen the night before, but no change was made in my original orders. At sunset of September 23rd, I arrived at a point about 1 mile from the mouth of Finschhafen Bay. I took a good look around through the periscope, but saw no PT boats. Nothing was picked up by the sound watch either. I held a flashlight to the periscope and pointed the periscope toward the shore so that men there could see it. A green light flashed in response. "All ahead full," I ordered, and kept I-177 submerged until we were well inside the bay. Then I slowed down and surfaced, moving into within 100 yards, then 50 yards, of the shore. Almost at once boats were alongside us, and unloading began in the darkness. It was finished in 30 minutes. Soft calls of "arigato, arigato," thank you, floated across the water's surface. When the green light flashed from the mouth of the bay, I swung I-177 about and worked up speed to 20 knots as we dashed out of there. We encountered no trouble on the way back to Rabaul and arrived there on September 26th. The month of September 1943 was a fair one in the Indian Ocean for Japanese submarines, but a poor one in the Pacific. We had 8 boats to the west, working with German U-boats. They sank half a dozen ships, although the U-boats did better. In October, our Indian Ocean boats began withdrawing to Penang for refit, so no sinkings were made between Africa and Australia by the Sixth Fleet. Nor did our Pacific Ocean boats get any. Besides my 2 September trips to New Guinea, I made 4 in October, 3 in November, and 4 in December, plus 1 in January. 6 other submarines engaged in that effort during that period: I-6, I-16, I-36, I-38, U-174, and I-176. Kidder, Aitaro Ankyu, of I-38, made the most trips, 16, while I was second with my 14. It was Ankyu who towed an Unkatu loaded with supplies and ammunition from Rabaul to Salamaua in June 1943. Seida Tsusoinaba had tried to tow one all the way from Kure to Kiska with I-36, but trouble developed with his towing equipment and the mission was unsuccessful. All of my trips followed pretty much the same pattern. The 6 torpedo tubes were loaded in case we met the enemy, but the extra torpedoes were removed from the hull to save weight. Our deck gun had already been removed, of course, leaving us with but a single machine gun for defence on the bridge. All shells for the deck gun left the ship with it, further decreasing our weight, and we made further reductions by removing all spare parts possible and cutting down on provisions for the crew. We carried only enough food for 7 days. Even our ballast tank water loads were kept to a minimum to allow more cargo to be loaded under the close supervision of my new executive officer, Lieutenant Tadashi Obori, and Chief Petty Officer Yukio Oka, my chief of the boat. They gave all orders to the crew and carefully directed the loading, stowage, trim, and balance. Submarines heading for New Guinea often encountered enemy air attacks along the way, so the loading had to be done in such a manner as would still permit us to dive swiftly when necessary. Rice and wheat usually made up the bulk of our loads. These were poured into rubber sacks, 44 pounds to the bag, and sealed so just enough air was left in each sack to give it some buoyancy. The bags were stacked on deck, covered with nets, and lashed down securely. What couldn't be put on deck went below. As for the rest of our cargo, a typical load consisted of canned food, canned biscuit, salt, soybean sauce, miso, bean paste, and umeboshi, dried plums. Many Japanese then believed that one could survive indefinitely on a diet of rice and umeboshi. Also included was katsuoboshi, the sticks of dried bonito fish I mentioned earlier. And of course we tried to load plenty of cigarettes. Clothing supplies included boots, chikatabi, split-toed sandals with rubber soles, and kaya, mosquito nets. Munitions included small field guns, rifles, machine guns, bazookas, hand grenades, and small arms ammunition. We also took along portable radio transmitters and receivers. Quinine, for fever, made up the largest part of our medical supplies. Miscellaneous equipment included bicycles and small carts that could be towed behind the bicycles, flashlights, candles, and matches. And I must not forget to mention what men on New Guinea often considered more important than anything else: mail from home. By the middle of October, the American drive through the Solomons and Bismarcks had really begun to gain momentum. They had driven us out of Kolombangara and Vella La Vella, and were gaining in strength on New Georgia. They were also massing for a move against Bougainville, an island that would put even their fighter aircraft within range of Rabaul. Nearly 350 enemy planes from New Guinea and Australia struck at Rabaul on October 12th. From then on, attacks were almost constant. On October 15th, construction of the final ship in the I-176 class was completed. She was I-185. On October 18th, the Army's retreat from Lae, New Guinea, over the mountains to Gali on the north shore, was completed. Of the 7,000 men who started out, over 1,000 perished along the way. The Army could assemble only 4,600 men of the 21st and 51st Divisions at the rendezvous, the Navy 1,300. Lieutenant Radachi requested that submarines come to Sio and Gali after that, so from October 18 that was our destination. Sick and wounded were brought aboard from one side of a submarine, while supplies were offloaded into Daihatsu on the other. I would put all hands who were not actually on watch to work unloading, and they could usually finish the job in about 30 minutes. My men would form chains, and they resembled a series of well-oiled pistons as I watched them from I-177's bridge. While 50 passed supplies over the side and took the helpless and sick on board, another 10 would undo the lashings that held down our deck cargo. When our hull was emptied of cargo and the sick men safely below, I would button up the boat and let I-177 slowly submerge. The bags of rice and wheat would then float free, and the Daihatsu working parties would still be picking them out of the water as I-177 cleared the area. I-36, under special orders from ADM. Koga tried to send her plane in over Oahu on September 21st. The attempt was unsuccessful. CDR Inaba tried again on October 8th, with no luck. The hills of the Hawaiian chain were studded with radar sets by that time. Patrol ships also carried them, as did patrol aircraft. Inaba's reconnaissance pilot's problem was threefold. First, he had to avoid aircraft and get in past them close enough for his plane to make the round trip. Then he had to avoid ships which ranged far out from Pearl Harbor on surface patrol. After that, this pilot, in a very slow plane, had to avoid radar and high-speed interceptor planes, which could shoot him down in one fast pass. Inaba's aircraft pilot and his crewman finally solved the problem. "The submarine cannot get in close enough so that an island will shield us from enemy radar during launching, Captain," they told him, and suggested that he launch them from far out at sea. They pointed out that a low-flying aircraft might be able to slip under the enemy's radar beams, provided that the shore defences had not been alerted to a submarine's presence. Inaba, then 300 miles south of Oahu, pointed out to the men that at that range they would not have enough fuel to get back to I-36. The pair simply shrugged. On October 19th, the plane was launched, and a shiver went down American spines when it got through. Its sighting caused a lot of excitement. The pilot reported seeing 4 aircraft carriers, 4 battleships, 5 cruisers, and 17 destroyers moored at Pearl Harbor. He was never heard from after that. I think he dived his plane into the sea rather than wait for pursuers to catch up with him. His information got to Aden, Koga, and was followed by more from I-36 the next day. Sea Dr. Inaba reported a large convoy south of the Hawaiian Islands, heading west. Almost immediately, I-19, I-35, I-169, and I-175 were ordered out to intercept. It was in October, after having carefully studied the German submarine we had given the designation RO-500, the High Command ordered construction of 23 special submarines. These were a revolutionary type of boat, designed expressly for very high underwater speed, which was considered the best defence against enemy anti-submarine vessels, whose sonar could not work effectively if their propellers were turning over rapidly, as during a pursuit. The subs were to be named the I-201 class, and would have a speed that no other nation's submarines would ever match for years. With a length-to-beam ratio of 12:1, the I-201 subs would make 19 knots underwater for 1 hour. They were to be completely streamlined, with disappearing forward and after machine guns dropping down into the deck when not needed for use. The first of these submarines was completed in February 1945, just after I returned from a second mission using the most fantastic weapons of World War II. These were our Kaiten, our human torpedoes. Chapter 13. Bougainville, the Gilberts, my last run to New Guinea. The enemy wanted to establish an airbase on Bougainville. From there, his land-based fighters would be able to provide protective escort for the bombers attacking Rabaul. This was part of a general plan to encircle our key base in that area, cut it off and render it useless. Then the enemy would sweep around and past Rabaul toward other objectives. On November 1st, 1943, Bougainville was invaded at Cape Torokina, on its southern shore, with thousands of enemy troops moving into an area that was only lightly defended by our garrison. The enemy then dug in only 225 miles from Rabaul. He had to be driven away. This landing caught Admiral Koga, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, somewhat off balance. He had just put almost all of his carrier-based planes ashore at Rabaul for a massive strike he intended to make against enemy ships in New Guinea waters. The bulk of his surface fleet was off Truk, so he sent down the ships from Rabaul to attack the enemy beachhead. This resulted in the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, which pitched 4 Japanese cruisers and 6 destroyers against an American force of 4 cruisers and 8 destroyers. It was a fight that might have been even had it not been for radar. In this battle, the American destroyers fired their torpedoes, then swerved out of the path of Japanese gunfire. The American cruisers, under Rear Adm. Merrill, stood off and poured out many salvos of 6-inch shells, changing course every few minutes so as to avoid any torpedoes fired at them. One of our cruisers was sunk, as was a destroyer. 4 others of our ships suffered damage. The counterstrike was turned back without getting anywhere near the enemy transports off Cape Torokina. The cruiser sunk was IJN Sendai, flagship of Rear ADM, Matsuji Ijuin's Destroyer Squadron 1. Ijuin survived the sinking but was not rescued at once. With the battle going against them, the rest of his ships had no choice but to retreat hastily. But Ijuin's great interest in physical fitness paid off for him. Uon Sendai went down early in the morning of November 2nd. In the forenoon of November 3rd, after swimming for nearly 30 hours, Ijuin was taken aboard Lat Kenji Matsuda's RO-104, which had been sent out from Rabaul to search for him. Had the situation not been so grim, there might have been humour in it. As an instructor at Etajima, Ijuin had been very hard on Matsuda during swimming classes. I-29 left Penang for Germany about this time. She was the 3rd Japanese submarine to head for Atlantic waters. Her commander was our underwater ace, Siki Dr. Takaichi Kinashi, who had been scoring again in the Indian Ocean. Unfortunately, this mission was to be Kinashi's last. It would end in his death. November 3 was the day Adm. Koga sent Vice Adm. Takeo Kurita down from Truk with 8 cruisers and 6 destroyers. Kurita was to stop off at Rabaul for fuel, then race into Empress Augusta Bay, of which Cape Torokina formed one arm. There, Kurita hoped he would find and smash the enemy's ships. When the enemy first landed on Bougainville, our air strength at Rabaul was nearly 400 planes. This force was to support Kurita by providing air cover. Kurita's force was smashed while still in Simpson Harbour. 2 American aircraft carriers sent nearly 100 planes over Rabaul on November 5 to hit Kurita, having sighted his ships while they were on their way down from Truk. Mr. Harrington learned from an American admiral who, as a commander, led some of the fighter planes in that attack, that American pilots had orders to cripple as many ships as possible, rather than concentrate on sinking just a few, so our ships could not get out to hit the beachhead at Bougainville. This the Americans truly accomplished. They put 4 of our cruisers and 1 destroyer out of action. 2 undamaged cruisers had to escort the damaged ones back to Truk. The loss of half his forces and most of his firepower eliminated any chance for Kurita to make a surface strike. 2 days later, using destroyers, our navy put 500 men ashore near Cape Torokina in a counter-landing, but this force was wiped out in a few days. Nothing could stop the Americans' march westward. By this time, Tokyo had reports from Tarawa Atoll in the Gilberts that the enemy was making air attacks on it. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki, in command of Tarawa, had been building defences there to anchor our island network of defences. He had close to 5,000 men with him and concentrated his efforts on Betio, an island at the atoll's southern end. Shibasaki expected that any attack made on him by ships would be driven off by long-range bombers from New Britain and New Ireland, plus the heavy guns of Kurita's cruisers. But Kurita's strength was sapped in just 1 aerial attack, and the Bismarck's air strength was shattered by American air attacks in early November. Shibasaki had to fight it out alone. On November 11th, the 4th submarine attached to Europe, I-34, left Singapore under Sea Doctor Tatsuo Iri. He was to stop at Penang en route, then proceed to the Atlantic with a cargo of tin, tungsten, quinine, and rubber for our German allies. All of it went to the bottom of the sea. Erie, the man so enamoured of his wife, died with all hands 2 days out of Singapore, ambushed by the British submarine HMS Taurus in Malacca Strait. Mr. Harrington interviewed one of 2 enlisted men who, with an officer, were the only Japanese to survive Betio, where the heavy fighting on Tarawa Atoll took place. Petty Officer Tadao Unuki later became a taxicab dispatcher. In early 1943, he was a truck driver with the Mihoro Air Group at Rabaul, and was returned to Yokosuka when the group was disbanded for lack of replacements. Unuki answered a call for volunteers to perform hazardous duty in the south, and soon found himself on Betio early in July. There he was the driver of a Type 97 light tank. "Life on Betio was good," said Unuki. "We had plenty to eat, drink and smoke, which was more than other outpost garrisons could say. Our sake ration was 1.5 quarts a month, and there were enough non-drinkers and non-smokers that a man could always exchange enough sweets to put himself in a smoky cloud, or alcoholic haze, when he was off duty. Our recreation consisted chiefly of swimming and fishing. We all stayed very healthy because of Betio's malaria-free climate. Betio's tank was one of those assigned to protect Admiral Shibasaki's command post bunker, which looked out over the atoll's lagoon. Betio was heavily defended because after the raid on Makin Island in August 1942, high officials decided to fortify our Gilbert's holdings heavily. Besides a thick palisade of logs and sand running along the water's edge inside the lagoon, Betio had many pillboxes built of logs reinforced by steel casings and sand. Most of the defences were completed by the time I arrived at Betio, Unuki said, but we spent the next 4 months improving them. Physical fitness has always been a fetish with many Japanese, and Unuki told Mr. Harrington that many men improved their physiques by building bunkers stronger in their free time, adding extra layers of logs to them, and heaping up more sand on their roofs. Admiral Shibasaki said, "1 million men could not take this island in 100 years, when the defences were completed." American long-range bombers attacked Betio sporadically for months. Carrier planes hit it on November 18th and 19. Since we had no surface fleet to send south, only submarines were sent to repel attackers. 6 out of 9 boats ordered into the Gilberts were lost there before Dekomosh won. The counterattack on Tarawa should be studied by future submariners as a horrible example of how not to use underseas ships. American Marines landed on Betio against heavy opposition on November 20th. They paid a high price for the island, but wiped out nearly all of its garrison and took control of the place in 3 days. On November 19th, while carrier planes were still attacking, Vice ADM Takagi, from his flagship Kalori at Truk, issued the first of many confusing orders. Lieutenant Zenshin Toyama was patrolling in I-169 between Hawaii and the Marshall Islands, and was just about at the end of cruising endurance. But Takagi ordered him into the Makin area since that island was also being attacked. With I-19, I-40 and RO-38, this boat was later ordered to form an intercept line north of Makin Island. All told, Takagi set up 5 sentry lines in 5 different areas, all to be formed in a period of 11 days. His staff tried frantically to deploy submarines rapidly, to meet a changing tactical situation hundreds of miles away, ordering boats to change positions frequently, to cruise on the surface sometimes and submerged at others. They filled the air with messages, which may have caused the loss of some submarines, and disgusted the captains, including myself, of the remainder. Surely the enemy intercepted some of these, and must have either decoded or at least evaluated some. I-19, under Lieutenant Sada to Shigeo Kobayashi, left Truk for the Hawaii area on November 3. On the 17th of that month, its plane made a reconnaissance of Pearl Harbor, returning safely to the ship. Kobayashi was then ordered to proceed to the Gilberts. Sea Dr. Katsuji Watanabe had I-40, a new ship that had arrived at Truk on November 19th, just after completing its shakedown training. Watanabe was a brave and experienced man who had successfully freed his stuck ship, I-169, from anti-submarine nets in the Hawaii Islands on December 9, 1941. He was ordered south and left Truk on November 22nd. RO-38, under Leyte Kidia Shunji Nomura, was another new submarine. He headed out of Truk on November 19th on his first mission as a submarine captain. As the situation developed, Takagi began sending out his series of sentry line orders. The first, for the submarines already mentioned to form a line north of Makin, went out on November 26th. The following day, an order went out for the submarines to form two new sentry lines, one east and one west of Makin, I-19, I-169, and RO-38 to the east, I-40 by I-39 and I-174 to the west. 2 days later, Admiral Takagi ordered I-21 and I-174 to remain in the Makin area. I-21 had come up to help from her patrol area in the Fijis. The other 5 submarines were to move south to positions east of Tarawa and form a line running southwest to northwest. Then, a day later, Takagi ordered I-169 back to the Makin area and the other 4 boats to move even further southeast. On December 3rd, when all submarines were ordered to report, only 3 responded. To get a clear picture of what happened in the Gilberts, let us follow all 9 submarines, one after another. I-35, left Truk on Oct. 11 for a patrol east of the Gilberts. Lieutenant Yamamoto, its captain, was on mission for more than 5 weeks when he was ordered to head for Tarawa. The 6th Fleet flagship next heard from him on November 22nd. Yesterday, his message read, I-35 pierced the enemy screen and got within sight of Tarawa. Sighted large enemy task force and tried to approach it, but was intercepted by aircraft and had to dive. This was the last word heard from him. On that same afternoon, Yamamoto again tried to get in and sink some of the enemy ships, but was detected by sonarmen of the U.S. destroyer Meade. Assisted by USS Fraser, this ship blasted I-35 with depth charges, forcing her to the surface where gunfire finished her off. Only 2 of the crew survived to be taken prisoner. I-19, the killer of USS Wasp and wounder of USS North Carolina and the ill-fated USS O'Brien, headed for Tarawa after recovering its plane off Oahu. The gentle, smiling Kobayashi messaged Takagi's headquarters on November 22nd. I expect to arrive within 30 miles of Tarawa in another 48 hours. Then no more was heard from him. The U.S. destroyer Radford picked up I-19 on radar in the darkness on November 25th. She closed in and dropped depth charges. Down to the bottom went the crew of I-19 and Kobayashi, the scholarly leader who was generally credited with playing an important role in evolving the Model 95 torpedo used in our submarines. The great Model 93 had a diameter of 24 inches. Kobayashi helped modify it to 21 inches so it would fit our tubes while retaining its great speed and striking power. Besides these 2, we lost 4 other submarines in the Gilberts, which Japanese usually consider part of the Marshall's campaign. The fighting there took place because the Americans had to secure their flank from attack before striking at the Marshalls themselves. I cannot account for the exact date of each submarine's loss or the conditions under which they were sunk. However, it is certain they went down before the very intense anti-submarine effort of the enemy escort ships and aircraft in the Tarawa-Makin area. The Americans had developed their anti-submarine tactics by that time to a degree our 6th Fleet staff members did not appreciate. I-21 was not heard from after November 27th. Sea Delta Hiroshi Inada had taken his boat out from Truk on September 25th for a patrol in the Fijis. He sank SS Cape San Juan on November 11th. Ordered to Tarawa, he headed there, although his crew was weary and his submarine near the end of its cruising endurance. On November 27th, the boat was 30 miles southwest of Tarawa, and Inada reported on ships sighted, but that was the last heard from him. It is hard to say, also, what happened to Shunji Nomura's RO-38. A surviving headquarters map, discovered after the war, shows him to have reached the positions assigned him by Admiral Takagi in messages sent on November 25, 26, 27, and 29. But he did not answer a general order to report sent out on December 3. Lt. Coder Makio Tanaka left Truk in I-39 on November 23rd, with orders to take a lone position 60 miles southwest of Tarawa. He reached it on November 25 and radioed that he had attacked enemy vessels, but no more was heard from him either. As for the 6th submarine lost, I-40 arrived in position at the first sentry line on November 26th, and the same surviving map shows that it moved to all positions ordered as Takagi's messages poured out. It also did not answer the December 3rd general call to report. 2 American claims for submarines sunk in the Gilberts are wrong. USS Criswold claims to have sunk I-39 in the Solomons on December 23, 1943. We lost no submarines at all during that month, and I-21 was certainly not the submarine sunk by destroyers Charity and Fair in the Marshalls on Phoebe. 5. 1944. A fresh review of attacks made on our submarines by enemy ships and planers in the Gilberts during November 1943 would probably give correct credit to whichever units did sink I-31, I-39, I-40, and RO-38. I am convinced that all were at the bottom of the sea by December 2nd. The story of the 3 submarines that did make it safely back to port is an interesting one. Toyama's I-169 was east of the Marshalls when ordered south. Toyama put into Kwajalein to refuel from I-32 and dug into the submarine's food supplies deeply as well. Extremely intense American air and surface anti-submarine patrols kept Toyama almost constantly submerged, but he was able to receive radio messages and make his station changes when ordered. Destroyer activities kept I-169 well away from its intended targets. He missed the one chance that came his way through no fault of his own. Forced under on disk. Won by an enemy plane, Toyama picked up a convoy on his sound equipment. It was so well escorted, though, that he could not come up and attack it. Toyama arrived back at Truk on December 9th with nothing but an exhausted crew to show for his efforts. I-174 was the boat of Lt. Kaja Nobukiyo Nambu. He was relieved of transport duty between Rabaul and New Guinea and arrived at Truk on November 16th, en route to Japan for general overhaul and repair. Takagi ordered him south, however, and after making hasty repairs, Nambu departed Truk on November 24th. He arrived west of Makin on November 29th, but saw no enemy ships that day or the next. Nambu then received a report of an enemy convoy 200 miles east of Makin, so he manoeuvred to ambush it. On December 1st, he said, I was not more than 3 miles off Makin, waiting for that convoy, but no enemy ships appeared. In the meantime, other submarines were dashing back and forth between the various stations assigned to them by 6th Fleet. First an order would say, move, then it would be changed to move navigating on the surface. Still later it would become wait remaining on the surface. These orders ignored completely the strong and weak features of a submarine. I'm positive that most of our submarines that were lost went down during this hectic and confused period. On December 3rd, Nambu was ordered to head for a point 250 miles southeast of Abemama, an islet southeast of Tarawa Atoll. There he was to intercept ships the enemy was expected to send to the island they had just taken from us. The next night, he said, we were cruising on the surface. There was no moon, but the sky was clear, with the stars bright. All of a sudden, one of my lookouts shouted, "Destroyer! Destroyer! Coming up fast! Astern!" Nambu dived his boat. Depth charges exploded all around I-174 while she passed the 100-foot mark. All lights went out, and all power was lost. We kept from plunging all the way to the bottom, Nambu said, only by blowing water from the ballast tanks, but each time we did that, a stream of bubbles gave the enemy another aiming point, and down would come another string of depth charges. Eventually, we sprung leaks in both the main engine room and in the electric motor room. All pumps stopped with the power failure, of course, so I ordered a bucket brigade to be formed. Crewmen used buckets, tin cans, and whatever else they could get their hands on to bail water out of the power room, because if it reached the electric motors, I-174 would lose all movements completely. Carefully, water was scooped up and dumped into the engine room. The level was reduced to just below the electric motors and kept there. As the attacks continued, I-174's supply of pressured air was slowly used up. Finally, with barely enough left to blow tanks and surface, Nambu decided to fight it out. His crew and he tightened hachimaki around their heads and blew ballast. Fortunately for them, no destroyer was in sight when they surfaced. In less than 2 minutes, however, an enemy plane was overhead and they had to dive I-174 once more. "We were in a more serious condition than ever then," said Nambu. "I was not sure we could bring the boat up one more time. As a last resort, we used the pressurized air for accelerating the diesel engines and tapped what air there was left in the torpedoes. This helped to stabilize the boat and, after 3 more hours, we broke surface again. I-174 was no longer in condition to fight, so I cabled Truk that we were returning." The one bright spot in the Gilbert's operations was the accomplishment of Lieutenant Dr. Sunao Tabata's I-175. Summoned from patrol northeast of the Marshalls, I-175 was off the north side of Makin on November 23rd. When Tabata spotted 4 enemy destroyers, this prevented his manoeuvring freely. On November 24th, however, he got an aircraft carrier in his periscope and fired several torpedoes. USS Liscombe Bay blew up at once and sank within 30 minutes, taking nearly 650 men with her, including the admiral commanding the carrier group. I-175 was counterattacked at once and suffered great damage. She headed north and finally eluded her pursuers by running for the protection of air bases at Kwajalein. She circled north and limped safely back to Truk. Tabata's crew was just as exhausted as the men under Nambu and Toyama, but at least they had something to show for their hard work. In exchange for the 6 submarines we lost in the Gilbert's campaign, the Americans lost 2. IJN Yamagumo, a destroyer, sank USS Sculpin. I'll tell later how USS Corvina was sunk. Both boats had been detailed to scout around Truk and to report any ships leaving there for the southern area. All this while, the dull and deadly work of getting supplies from Rabaul to outposts went on. We lost another of our submarines on November 25, the same day Radford got I-19. She was RO-100, commanded by Lieutenant Cadet Hisao Ogan, who left Rabaul on November 23rd for Buin at the southeast corner of Bougainville. Ogani got safely past enemy air and surface patrols, only to hit an enemy mine just short of his destination and sink. Also, on that same day, a battle was fought that brought Captain Ali A. Burke, USN, fame. It made him, one might say, the American Reizo Tanaka. This was the sea battle off Cape St. George, New Ireland. Off the northwest tip of Bougainville, separated from it by a narrow strip of water, is Buka, the airstrip nearest to Rabaul. The Americans had bombed and shelled it frequently, so we decided to put more troops ashore there in case of an amphibious attack and to take off planiless airmen who could be of more use elsewhere. 5 destroyers under Capt. Kyoto Kagawa were given the job. The trip out from Rabaul was uneventful. Troops were landed and airmen picked up, but, on the way back, Kagawa ran into 5 American destroyers under the command of Burke. Using radar to establish range and bearing, Burke fired torpedoes, keeping his guns silent so flashes would not betray his position. 2 of our destroyers were hit and sunk. A third was caught and sunk in a pursuit. None of Burke's little beavers were hurt. I was sleeping soundly in the officers' quarters on a hill above Simpson Harbour when the battle began. I needed rest badly, having completed a transport run shortly before, but a jangling telephone awakened me. On the other end was Chief Staff Officer Horinuchi, who rapidly explained that 3 of our destroyers had been sunk and that it was important to rescue as many of the airman passengers as I could. Japan was truly in short supply of experienced flyers by that time. "How soon can you get underway?" I was asked. "I'll be out of the harbour in an hour," I replied. "Good!" Horinuchi exclaimed. I don't remember what else he may have said. My mind was filled with how daring the Americans must be, attacking our large 35-knot destroyers right on our doorstep. I dressed rapidly and had I-177 moving out within an hour, as I had promised, racing down St. George's Channel at 22 knots. As I swung east around the Cape, I made a decision. A submerged run would be wise, but I couldn't delay. I kept I-177 on the surface, trusting to my crew's skill to avoid an ambush. By noon, we had survived 4 different attacks by patrol bombers, their depth charges exploding in I-177's wake as we dived. From noon on, I ran submerged. At 3 p.m., having been told by my navigator that we should be about 3 miles from where the survivors were, I raised the periscope. At once I could see 2 men in the water, so I surfaced right in the middle of a group of survivors. Setting a doubled watch for enemy aircraft, we started taking men aboard. Most were semi-conscious from shock and exhaustion, and all were thickly coated with fuel oil. Luck was with us. We hauled men out of the sea for 3 hours without seeing enemy planes. At 6 p.m., I asked the executive officer how many we had on board. "There are 227 so far, Captain," he answered. "I've got them behind the main engine, in the pump room, in the storerooms, in all passageways, and even under the mess tables." With my crew, this brought I-177's human load to more than 300. No more could be safely brought aboard and still permit me to work the ship. We couldn't do much once darkness fell. I had no radar. Enemy night searchers would be aloft. It was heartbreaking to halt the rescue effort while there were still men in the water, but I couldn't risk 300 lives just to save a few more. "Clear the deck!" I called out, and men engaged in rescue work scurried inside the hull. I let my navigator have the con, but remained on the bridge as I-177 worked up speed. A few minutes after we started moving west, 2 great water columns spouted up, one on either side of I-177. Bombs. Seconds later, an enemy plane passed over us so close that I could see his exhaust smoke in the twilight. My navigator shouted, "Clear the bridge!" and I dropped down the hatch to get out of his way. He followed the lookouts and myself down, shouting, "Dive! Dive!" I-177 was under the waves before the plane, which had glided silently in on us, could make another pass. We got back to Rabaul without further incident and put our passengers ashore. I took supplies to Seo, New Guinea, 4 times in December, and brought back men sick beyond the ability of doctors and facilities on that island to help them. They were dirty, starving with every rib showing starkly. All resistance to disease was gone. The merest insect bite would suppurate. All gave off a stomach-turning stench. Many came down with malarial seizures and groaned awfully. We fed them kayu, the rice gruel used throughout Japan for nursing the ill, and it sometimes gave them a bit of strength. Still, on each trip, 2 or 3 men would die before we reached Rabaul. Only a man who fought on New Guinea can really tell how awful an ordeal the campaign was, for both sides. Men so sick they could hardly stand, staggered out to do battle on the ground and in the air for both sides. Thousands of Japanese died of starvation on that black island. Thousands more, plus thousands of Americans, Australians and New Zealanders, succumbed to disease. And even more thousands who survived the war have never recovered their health. I-8 arrived safely in Europe on December 1st. All hands were treated royally by the Germans. Sidiata Uchino and his men had lots of happy stories to tell when they got home. On that same day, the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters released a communiqué about the Gilbert's battle. It claimed that our planes had sunk 2 enemy aircraft carriers and 1 warship of an unidentified type. That brought the total of carriers we had supposedly sank in the Gilberts to 8. In November, the Imperial General Headquarters claimed to have sunk the following ships in battles for Bougainville: 4 battleships, 5 aircraft carriers, 12 cruisers, 9 destroyers, 6 transports, 1 warship of unidentified type, and over 40 landing craft. As can be seen, the true picture of the Pacific War was not getting through to the average Japanese citizen. The British credit Japanese submarines with sinking 9 of their ships in November-December in the Indian Ocean, and not more than 3 Americans' ships fell victim to our boats in that area in that same period. In the Pacific, our score was 0 except for a submarine, a small aircraft carrier, and a cargo ship. The enemy's assault on New Britain itself began on December 15th, with a landing at Arawe, about 200 miles west of Rabaul. 11 days later, US Marines landed at Cape Gloucester, on the northern side of New Britain, near Dampier Strait. We had an airfield there that the enemy wanted. On December 18th, the first submarine of our new I-52 class was completed at Kure. All told, 46 of these were planned, but only 3 were laid down and completed: I-52, I-53, and I-56. These were almost sisters to the I-15 class, but carried no aircraft. They also had a second 140mm deck gun, although both guns were removed from I-53 when she later became a K-10 carrier. I-52 class boats were 359 feet long and displaced 2,063 tons. They made 17.7 knots on the surface, 6.5 submerged. Ranger was 21,000 miles at 16 knots, underwater endurance 105 hours at 3 knots. Besides 6 bow-tubes and a load of 19 torpedoes, they had a 25mm twin machine gun mounted at the conning tower after end. We lost 27 submarines during 1943. In that year, the enemy lost only 26 merchant ships in the Pacific and 82 in the Indian Ocean. In the Atlantic and Mediterranean, he lost 489 ships, which points up how much the change of our Japanese submarines into transports had hurt our offensive effort. This was a criminal shame. Our men were as competent as American and German submariners, and their morale was as high. Officers could not even get into submarine duty until they were lieutenant, junior grade. After 2 years of a familiarization duty, they were ordered ashore to service schools in torpedoes, navigation, communications, diesel engines or electricity, lasting 6 months. After that, they took 4 months of special training. It consisted chiefly of making dives and learning the skills and techniques necessary for diving a submarine. Then they became department heads in gunnery, torpedoes or communication, sometimes serving concurrently as executive officer. After 3 to 5 years in submarines, they might be ordered to the submarine commander's course. That's where the final weeding out took place. Men showing lack of aptitude or physical defects were flunked. It took a good man to rise to command of a Japanese submarine. I must admit, I needed a lot of help to make the grade myself. Enlisted men came strictly from service schools, having courses related to submarines, like torpedo, gunnery, or engines. Only those with fine physiques and especially good hearing were chosen. As with American submariners, men had to be psychologically fitted to live for long periods in confined spaces, and they trained for 6 months in submarine school before assignment to an active boat. The pay was an attraction. All men received an extra 30%. And even in peacetime, time spent in submarines was counted double in calculating retirement allowances. There was never a lack of volunteers, and a great spirit of fellowship developed from our having to be interdependent. We considered ourselves a breed apart from the rest of the Navy, another reason why we resented not being employed more effectively. On December 30th, 1943, I made the report on my CO mission to Rear ADM, Noboru Owada, who had relieved Admiral Harada as Commsubron 7. Owada wanted me to take supplies into Buin, Bougainville, where none had been sent since RO-100 hit 2 mines and sank 5 weeks before. "You know I am not exaggerating, Orita," he told me, when I say that the lives of men there depend on successful completion of this mission. I did not doubt that. We had more than 20,000 men on Bougainville. They had been using up their supplies rapidly in the 2 months since the enemy had landed there. Unless they received some assistance, they would suffer the same fate as so many on Guadalcanal, malnutrition followed by death. I began preparations the following day, knowing it would not be an easy mission. Both straits leading into Buin had been heavily sown with American mines, and PT boats kept a close watch. I doubted that even a mouse could slip into Buin, but I was determined to try. My work was interrupted for distant emperor worship on New Year's Day, and that ceremony itself was interrupted by an air raid, but I got I-177 to the harbour's bottom and out of danger swiftly. On the night of Janvier 2, I was summoned to Subron 7 headquarters. From there I accompanied Admiral Owada to the operations room in the headquarters of Vice ADM. Jinichi Kusaka, Commander-in-Chief of the Southeast Area Fleet, his Chief of Staff, Ria Aden, Ryonosuke Kusaka, told me that my mission had been changed. "Our forces at Sio are surrounded, Orita," he said. "The enemy landed troops at Sidor today. Road communication between Sio and Madang is cut off." The enemy had been steadily pushing our troops westward, out of Buna, Lai, Salamaua and Finschhafen, and were pressing against Sio. Our next strong point was Madang, about 110 miles further west, but the enemy had made a landing between those two places, at Sidor. This movement trapped the headquarters of the 18th Army and the 18th Naval Base Force at Sidor, where Lieutenant Hatazo Adachi and Rea Adm Kunizo Mori were based. "General Adachi has ordered a general withdrawal toward Madang," the Chief of Staff told me, "but estimates that it will take as much as 2 months to circle around through the jungle past the enemy. During that time he would be out of touch and could not direct land operations, so we have decided to use a submarine to move the general quickly from Sio to Madang." This seemed to me like a good idea. If the enemy could leapfrog, so could we. I left Rabaul the following day. Travelling most of the way submerged, I did not reach Sio until sunset of Jan. 8. Again, I held a flashlight against my periscope's eyepiece so it could be seen from the shore, and my men were very swift in transferring cargo to the Daihatsu that soon came out to us. Then a boat started from the shore carrying General Adachi and Admiral Mori. It was less than halfway to us when a lookout shouted, "PT boats?" My signals petty officer quickly blinked a message to the shore that I would return the following night. Crewmen secured what cargo was still on board. I dived I-177. I came back the next night at sunset, as promised, but found PT boats hovering near my rendezvous point. I kept the boat submerged, but ran up the radio antenna and sent a message. "We will return tomorrow night," I messaged, "but before sunset. We will then try to take passengers aboard. Please stand by to repel enemy torpedo boats if they try to interfere." Then I moved out to sea. On the following night, Jan 10, I brought I-177 off Sio while it was still light. If the PT boats followed their usual custom of coming in after sunset, I hoped to be gone before they arrived. I also went in much closer to the shore than before. As soon as my periscope showed above the surface, 3 Daihatsu took stations around me, machine guns mounted and manned. Then, when I was sure that my passengers had left the shore, I surfaced the boat and crewmen ran to our 25mm machine gun. 2 PT boats showed up right after that, but ran into a barrage from my machine gunners and the Daihatsu men. They returned the fire, but it made them cautious, and they hove to more than a half-mile away. Gunfire rattled as I took aboard General Adachi, Admiral Mori, 10 of their staff members, and 25 bags of headquarters equipment and records. The Daihatsu and PT boats were still exchanging fire as I backed I-177 off, put her about, and dived. The next day I put my passengers ashore at Madang safely, and returned to Rabaul without further incident. When I left for Sio, 2 other submarines left Truk, heading for Rabaul to help us in the transport effort. Lieutenant Seiktio Mitsuma Itakura, with whom I was later to work closely in the Kaiten effort, had I-41. An Etajima classmate of mine, Lieutenant Setsidata Takeo Shimada, had I-171. Itakura made a successful run to some of our troops in western New Guinea who were trapped and needed supplies, then left Rabaul on Jan. 31 to do what I had been scheduled to do a month earlier. He headed for Buin. Displaying great skill, Itakura took I-41 through minefields and enemy patrols to land his cargo. Then he made his way out again, returning to Rabaul on Feb. 7. Shimada did not have such luck. He was heading for Buka, at the other end of Bougainville from Buin, when he ran into a force of enemy destroyers on Feb. 1. These had on board a party of raiders who were heading for Green Island, not far from Cape St. George. Their mission was to determine whether that island was suitable for building an airstrip before the enemy would decide to take it. I-171 was picked up by the electronic fingers of USS Fulham and pointed out to the destroyers Guest and Hudson. They sank Shimada's ship. 2 other submarines were lost in 1944 before Shimada's boat went down. The first was I-181, commanded by Light Seeditor Kiyoshi Taoka. He left Rabaul on Jan 13, heading for Gali, New Guinea, about 40 miles west of Sio, to land supplies there for the troops retreating toward Madang to rendezvous with General Adachi. I-181 was scheduled to meet the troops on Jan 16, but never arrived. A radio message from New Guinea said that PT boats or destroyers must have sunk the submarine in Vitiaz Passage, the strip of water off northern New Guinea. The other submarine lost was RO-37, commanded by Lieutenant Seidir Sakuma Sato. It had left Truk on Jan 3 for a patrol off the New Hebrides. Sato met the American fleet tanker USS Cache on Jan 23 and put a torpedo into her. She got off a distress call. Sato continued on his way, unaware that a nearby US destroyer, Buchanan, had intercepted the call and was rushing to aid the stricken ship. Their paths crossed before RO-37 had travelled another 30 miles, and Buchanan's radar picked her up. RO-37 was sunk by a depth-charge barrage. I was relieved of transport duty on Jan 13, 1944. I-177 by then had been operating almost continually for 6 months. Her crew, hull, weapons and engines were all about ready to collapse. My own health had been going steadily downhill too, like all my men, although I had been fortunate in not contacting malaria. The sub needed overhaul badly, but enemy air raids on Rabaul had destroyed most of the shops, tools and equipment needed. So I left Rabaul for Truk on Jan. 14. When I first arrived in Simpson Harbour, a year before, it had been filled with ships, nearly 200 of them, and I had difficulty manoeuvring through them to moor. On the day I left, there were no vessels present other than the scorched hulks of 3 transports that had burned after being beached. There were still 100,000 men on New Britain. I felt sorry for these orphans of the South Pacific, surrounded and cut off. There was little hope for them. The situation for our 6th Fleet was not much better at Truk. The Gilbert's operation had cost 6 submarines, and captains of the 3 surviving ones had complained bitterly. I am positive, Lieutenant Nobukio Nambu reported, that all the submarines lost went down without even getting a chance to attack the enemy. He claimed that radar had picked up all of them, including his own I-174, before they got within striking range. Nambu also pointed out that I-169 and I-175 should never have been sent at all, because their crews had already been out for some time and were tired. As for RO-38, he said, she was fresh from home waters, with an inexperienced crew that still needed lots of training. Lieutenant Tabata, who had sunk Liscombe Bay, and Lieutenant Toyama of I-169 agreed with Nambu. The enemy had his interceptors spread and waiting for us, they said, and we made his task easy by putting so many boats into one small area. He had no trouble finding us. Wherever he looked, we were underfoot, and 6th Fleet headquarters required reports from us too often, again making for easy discovery through radio detection, and the orders to cruise on the surface, or wait on the surface, were ridiculous. I was in just as bad a temper when, dressed in my whites, I boarded flagship Katori, Vice Adm, Takagi, Chief of Staff Rear Adm, Hisao Mito, and Operations Staff Chief Cap T. Chosaburo Takahashi wanted to hear about our transport operations. I minced no words. As all here know, I began, using submarines for transport is throwing away the reason for their construction. Presently, however, it appears that we have no choice. Still, the work is not as easy as headquarters planners seem to think. It takes too much out of the crews, both physically and mentally. Then I went on to give detailed reports on the 14 missions I had carried out, adding that my men wanted to fight, not pass boxes of cargo. "I understand the problems very well, Orita," said Admiral Takagi, "and you may rest assured that I shall have attack submarines attacking as soon as the special transport submarines now under construction begin coming off the ways. Thank you for your efforts. I hope you and your men will get a good rest while here at truck refitting." With that, he started to rise from his chair, closing the meeting. But I was not passing up the only chance to say what I felt. I had an obligation to speak for all my friends who had given their lives in submarines. "Admiral," I said, "I have other things I would like to add." Takagi, a polite man, begged my pardon, resumed his seat, and bade me continue. I did. "My year down here has taught me many things," I said. "For one thing, submarines are of no use for counterattacks against enemy beachheads. Those places are too well screened. We do not have the underwater speed for getting in past them or for escaping after detection. Submarines should be interposed between the enemy's beachhead and his supply sources, thus giving indirect support to our troops on land by reducing the amount of men and equipment that can be used against them. Then there is the matter of sentry lines. The wolf pack system makes it easier for the enemy to detect us, and where he detects one, he can detect the others even more easily. Thus, all are endangered by one. We must face the fact that submarines are designed not to give the enemy one great blow, but a number of small ones. Submarines should be deployed widely and independently. Their achievements cannot be measured over short periods, but over great lengths of time. Third, our chief weapon for detecting the enemy at present is 120mm binoculars. Top priority must be given to equipping submarines with radar and electronic countermeasure devices. Lastly, there is the matter of surface mobility. Planning officers have too much faith in our high surface speed. This advantage is now gone because of radar, nor is poor weather an advantage for us. In RO-101, I realized that even darkness is no longer our friend. I charged batteries twice a day, using the dim twilight, in RO-101 and also in I-177. The fact that they both survived many missions is proof that it is a good tactic. Capt. Takahashi thanked me for my report, saying that his assistants would certainly take my ideas into consideration. Then Rear Admiral Mito spoke up. "What Lieutenant Commander Orita says may be correct when weighed against new principles and developments in anti-submarine warfare," he said, "but operational control cannot always be tethered to principles. Sometimes we have to send our submarines out when there is not even a 50-50 chance of their returning." Mito's bland disregard of all I had said angered me, and I lost my temper. "All submariners are willing to give their lives at sea," I said, pounding the table. "What we expect of you and your staff is that you keep that 50% chance in mind. Otherwise, we will lose all of our boats. It will be mass suicide for submarine captains." Mito didn't like this tone in a junior's voice. "Are you dissatisfied with the way the staff does things, Orita?" he asked angrily. "Are you criticizing us?" "It is not a matter of dissatisfaction or of criticism," I shouted back at him. "I am merely expressing my honest and ardent hopes based on my experience in the combat areas." "Vice Adm." Takagi broke in then. "Orita speaks from experience," he said, "and his views are valuable. There is no doubt of that. But, in my opinion, they reflect a negative attitude. No matter what the difference may be between our capability and that of the enemy, we still must carry out our orders, mustn't we? This has always been the battle spirit of Japanese submarine men, has it not?" I wanted to say more. I wanted to tell Takagi that his words were immediate evidence of his own underestimating the enemy. The man with the longer sword usually wins a duel, no matter how great the battle spirit of his opponent. But I held my tongue. The Admiral had his problems. Even though he was as worried about the proper use of submarines as I, he had to display confidence and optimism at all times. As the top man in our submarine command, he had to radiate calm and never doubt. I felt sorry for him. The conference ended and a luncheon was served, but the situation was awkward. No one at the table said very much, and, an unusual thing for Japanese officers gathered around any kind of table, no one laughed.